Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic and, when available, on location. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept. In this episode, we're discussing next-generation storage and the provocative idea that next-generation storage just isn't storage anymore. Before we start out, though, let's meet our guests. Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy Banta. My Twitter handle is very easy. It's at Andy Banta. I'm a storage janitor.
And hi, I'm Enrico Signoretti. I work for Gigam as a senior data storage analyst, and you can find me on Twitter on eSignoretti.
Hi there, Erik Ableson, independent consultant working out of France, mostly on infrastructure stuff. Ableson on Twitter and infrageeks.com for the blog.
And I am Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT. You can find me at sfoskett on most social media sites. You can find me hosting the On-Premise IT Roundtable and utilizing AI podcasts. And also, I'm a longtime storage nerd. And that's why this premise is especially meaningful to me. So just for background, we're hosting a Storage Field Day event this week. And I was looking through the list of companies that are presenting, and it occurred to me that none of these are really storage companies. Now, some of them get a little close. You know, they do make storage arrays or, storage devices of some sort. But, overall, this just isn't storage anymore. Enrico, I'm going to throw this to you to kick it off because as in your job looking at storage for GigaOM, I think you've probably noticed that there just isn't storage anymore.
Yeah, in general, we are seeing this transition. So even the traditional companies are starting to think differently about what they do and how they present themselves to the customer. So, for example, in the list of the vendors that we'll present next week, we have Pure Storage. They started as the fancy guys with the old flash arrays at that time, but actually the old flash array, even if it's still a very important part of their business, they started to add, cloud services. They started to add Portworx, and they're building on top of it. They are building a new layer that span across clouds to move your data around. So it's really cool to see this transformation of even this, standard. Let's call that standard vendors in something that is a next generation data services vendors.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I'm looking at the list of upcoming vendors, and what I'm seeing here is moving out of that protocol space is we're not talking about iSCSI, and we're not talking about Fiber Channel anymore. We're moving up the stack. We're talking about, NVMe seems to be the new winner here, but that's a whole other podcast. But I'm also looking stuff here about Hammerspace, talking about abstraction of where your data lives, MinIO, dealing with all the new S3 stuff for applications and everything else that goes along with that. And we're talking higher up the stack. It seems like the storage array itself is a solved problem. So now we're moving up to places where we're doing more and more interesting things. So it's not the same storage market that we used to be in a few years ago.
Right. And what I see an awful lot of is that this is the storage problem is solved, and all of the new solutions that are coming out are actually nibbling at the various different edges of the problems of, how do you handle the scale that you're trying to do? How do you handle the high availability, the fault tolerance, the various different software services that you want to do? And having been in the storage industry for a long time, the actual act of putting the data down on whatever the media is was never really the problem. It was an awful lot of what do you do with it once it's there, and this is just an expansion of that idea. Most of these companies that are coming in here have something new that they're providing to handle various different customer problems of, what do you actually do with the storage? What do you actually do with the stored data rather than how do you actually store it?
Yeah, actually, to your point, and there is this, new angles that these vendors are taking. So, for example, we have a Racktop system. It's security focused, 100% security focused. So they designed their storage system around this concept. While again, Hammerspace is all about data management in a distributed environment. which is a totally different way to think about things. So it really changes the perspective of the users, but also from the point of view of how they are deployed, what kind of problem they solve. It's changing everything. I mean, it's quite incredible what these guys are doing.
Well, it's a pretty amazing evolution of this market when you look at what we're no longer trying to solve the basic problems of can we build resiliently high available storage backends. That we've got that down. Now, as Andy's pointed out, the question is, let's move up a scale and say, okay, so what do we do with this from the application layer? What do we do with this from a data governance layer? How do we make sure in the days of ransomware and data exfiltration, how do we secure this stuff? And that's all of a sudden, it's a whole new market where we're finally starting to talk to the subjects that the CIOs were talking about and going, here's my problem. And instead of being a storage admin going, my problem is keeping the lights on and making sure that things work and I've got enough space. Now we're starting to finally be able to address the business issues from a product level, which is really, really cool.
I was going to jump in there and say that as well. It's interesting. Hammerspace is a really interesting case because this is a company that had some solid storage array expertise in the past, but yet they realized that just really isn't what they should be focusing on, and really gave it up. And you look at Hammerspace and Sios, and both of them are, well, they're not storage array companies whatsoever. I mean, there's no storage array involved here. I mean, that's something that's further down the stack.
Right. I mean, what I see out of this is that the people who are doing interesting things in storage are not traditional storage companies. They're companies that are coming in and doing other things around what's needed for storage. And these are not the people who are providing the hardware that you put your stuff on. They're the people who are providing the services that are important to you for storage. And I mean, this of course would be the way that the industry would blossom. It would be that the base stuff is taken care of, and then you come along with the secondary effect or tertiary effect companies. At this point, they're actually providing the more interesting things that you actually need out of your storage, rather than just storage itself. And when we look at the people we're talking to, these are not people who are actually the ones who are doing the storage anymore. They're the ones who are providing the what's cool and new to do with your storage rather than the storage itself.
And again, I think that if we look at many of these players here, they are really also thinking about how you consume the storage. That is different from the past. So APIs, a lot of APIs that was not the case a few years back. Infrastructure as code, and Kubernetes as the platform on which they deploy this part of infrastructure. So Kubernetes is part of the storage infrastructure, which is incredible if you think about it, because Kubernetes was meant to run application only, but most of these guys can run it in containers and can take advantage of these platforms as well, and they can be deployed everywhere. So you have a separation finally between the physical and the smart part of the storage system.
I guess the one player in here, well, no fungible plays in this space. We really still have a couple that are, I would say old school is probably exaggerating, and I certainly wouldn't call neither fungible nor vast old school as far as technology goes, but they're more traditional in the sense that they're selling a product which is, here's where you put your stuff. But they are approaching it with the integration of a whole set of modern stacks, which is, let's get rid of that entire legacy stack. And we were going, I mean, both of them were talking, again, NVMe upends the entire storage protocol stack that we've been dealing with historically. And now we're talking multiple streams, we're talking S3 integration. Again, we have a whole bunch of services layered on top, which are all about modern services. And we're leaving a lot of that legacy stuff behind, finally, which is nice to see.
I would put this from a different perspective. So if you think about vast data, for example, they are, sharing their revenue numbers, and they talk only about the storage, the software part now. While Fungible and Intel, for example, they are component manufacturing in the very core, but they are enabling something that is not possible with software alone. So they are enablers from that point of view of new, even new architectures that were not possible a few years ago. So I mean, it's tricky, but actually, if you look at the different perspective that we have today, it's really cool. There is no real just the appliance that we were installing in the data center a few years ago. It's much more complex. It's also much more, interesting space.
Well, what I see actually is when we take a look at an awful lot of the services and on an awful lot of the new features that people are providing, they're actually bridging the gap between on-premises physical storage and cloud storage. So I think that might be one of the pushing factors here is that we actually want storage services that can take advantage of hybrid situations where you have local storage or you have cloud storage, or you might be moving things back and forth between them. So I think that might be an awful lot of where this next generation storage is aiming at, would be how to provide the exact same storage services regardless of where your bits are stored.
So I'd like to bring up a couple of specific cases here. We haven't really talked yet about Racktop. This is an interesting idea. A group of security-minded individuals from the federal spy agency backgrounds. They created a secure storage platform. This is really a wild twist on storage, isn't it? To have a storage device that's focused on security.
Yeah, Racktop is one of those really interesting ones that's very much with the times, because all of a sudden we've spent years as storage people worrying about how do I make my stuff available? And the questions were always, who are my enemies? My enemies are water, fire, power, or lack thereof, as a more specific question. And what's changed is all of a sudden now my enemies are actively evil people trying to get in and destroy and take my data away from me, either so that I can't use it or so that they can take it out and sell it to other people, which is not at all what we trained a bunch of storage admins and designed products for the last 20 years. I've been building highly available multi-site arrays, metro clusters, what have you. But metro clusters are great, and they're going to faithfully replicate all the encrypted data that those nasty people just gave me. So all of a sudden we're dealing with a business problem, which we didn't used to have. And it's really interesting to see people step up to the plate to deal with this kind of a problem.
Well, the same goes for the others, I think. So data is the new oil, as they say. I mean, is the most important asset of your company. So yes, you know, when we didn't have the internet, we didn't have all this connectivity, all these open doors everywhere. It was easy to say, "Oh, my problem is the lack of power, or any sort of disaster, even human disasters, because the human disaster was the worst one." but but now that we finally understand that we need the data where we need it, I mean, so a solution like Hammerspace, for example, no, that they can somehow teleport your data from a site to the other fairly quickly, or even Racktop system that can give you a visibility that was not possible before. We are really thinking about data, and we are abstracting. And even when I talk about MinIO has serverless functionalities, S3 SQL, S3 Select, sorry. This is smarter than in the past. I mean, it's just I put some data there. I can offload some functionality to the storage system to make my code more intelligent, more optimized, or whatever. So this is really cool from my point of view.
Right, and I mean it's to expand on that a little bit. It's when we're talking about next generation storage isn't storage anymore. It's we're not using RAID systems for resilience anymore. We've gone beyond, and we're coming up with all sorts of new ways for resilience. We're adding new services that provide what had been provided for previously with RAID type systems or traditional type storage are now being handled by the new vendors coming along and the new software systems coming along to provide similar services to what we were trying to get 20 years ago with entirely new approaches to it. The avoiding active attacks is one of the issues. The ability to run nonstop is another thing that's being approached in an entirely different way these days. And again, the complete scale of everything that's going on these days has changed dramatically from what it was a decade ago or so, where everything now is a video file or everything now is a massive data set, and you need to be able to manage these. You can't spend days going through a terabyte of data. You need to be able to access the data fast enough that you can actually analyze it in a reasonable amount of time. And a lot of these different approaches are looking at the resilience and scale in a much different way, simply because you can't look at them in traditional ways.
Yeah, and when we're talking about scale, of course, we've got to look at, for example, vast data. I mean, you mentioned MinIO, and obviously that is a massively scalable solution. But vast data, as Andy was saying, I mean, this is a solution that's been really embraced in the markets, for example, machine learning and data science, where they're dealing with scale that we've never seen in storage traditionally, and not just scale in terms of terabytes, scale in terms of file sizes, in terms of numbers of files, in terms of numbers of clients as well. I mean, Vast is a really good name for that product.
Right, and I was simply going to say that in terms of number of clients, that's what actually one of the places where NVMe comes in to replace traditional SCSI. Is it really isn't that different from traditional SCSI, other than it's built in the ability to do far more transactions in a far more parallel way.
Yeah, and this is then the point where we find vendors like Intel and Fungible entering the game, because NVMe opened this parallelism, shortened the data path and everything, and now we have all this available storage. This is not the bottleneck anymore. The CPU became the bottleneck, so you have to build this through these components, DPUs, and Intel will obtain a storage layer that is closer to the CPU to have this additional layer to go through to just in somehow having a caching layer or any other buffering mechanism.
Right, but it's not just closer to the CPU. NVMe is being used both locally at the local bus layer and over fabrics. So the NVMe command protocol provides you a lot more capability to do a lot more things in parallel. That's why vendors are looking at it. That's why vendors like Fungible and Pure are looking at this type of thing. It's the command protocol is still the basic SCSI command set, but it's applied in a much different way, and the ability to do it either locally. Again, we've broken apart the command layer and the protocol layer, and the protocol layer can be either the local bus within your system, or it can be one of the various other transports that are out there that are available as well. Again, it's the same basic breakdown of command versus transport. It just handle it at a different layer.
Oh, and that's the thing that's been fascinating to me, is because when you talk about scale, as Stephen was pointing out, it's not so long ago talking about 1 million IOPS. We'd be talking about a room-sized storage array. I can get 1 million IOPS off a single M2 latest PC generation single SSD. So all of a sudden, the scale that we have to cope with this stuff is utterly different. The models that we have to deal with them have totally changed. We're not dealing with, where's my bottleneck? Well, it's the storage thing at the end of the wire. Now there's all sorts of fast devices that mean we have to re-architect all of our storage and go, what's the business problem I'm trying to solve so that I can get access to these IOPS so that I can use them effectively?
And that, I think, is a key here as well. So let's really zoom in on that. So we have a couple of solutions here that are really radically different. So you mentioned fungible before, which of course is, well, it's unlike anything I've ever seen before, and it's a really interesting and innovative way to approach storage. But then, of course, there's the elephant in the room: Intel Optane. So most of the world hasn't gotten much of an update from Intel in a long time, because they were splitting off the old NAND business into Solidigm with SK Hynix. But now that that's done, I think the world is just waiting to see, the computing world is waiting to see what Intel does next, because Optane was never a good media for SSD. Optane is fundamentally a transformative media more than anything else. And so if you look at what's happening in server architecture with disaggregation and CXL and PCIe 4 and 5, I think we're going to see some really radically changed storage solutions and an overall system solutions in the future.
I think that's one of the key things that we saw when VAST came to the table, as they explained in the first go-round, was we looked ahead and said, assuming these components will be available on the market when we come to market, and Optane being one of those key players, we can design an entirely different, radically different storage architecture. And we're starting to see suddenly a lot of people playing catch up and go, hey, this is really cool technology that doesn't fit anywhere else in our systems. And what's something innovative that we could do with it? And again, that has changed and utterly changed the storage package. Now going, okay, I don't just look at what does my storage array give me? It's like, how is it going to deal with this stuff? How is it going to give me that extra boost for my database performance? Is my cache going to live in memory, or is it going to live in something like the Optane memory storage mix? What am I thinking of those? The Optane DIMMs, that's the word I'm looking for.
And yes, there is also, this project DAOs that Intel presented a long time ago, and now is fully optimized for Optane. I mean, the numbers are crazy. I mean, performance wise, we are talking about one of the best file systems / object stores in the market. So,
and to bring this full circle, since we are talking about a different type of media to store our bits on, this is where an awful lot of the new software, the next generation storage software, is actually coming from. The need to actually think differently about how we're actually storing the bits and how we will manage them now that they're there. So this is taking the traditional storage problems and applying next generation storage technology to solve the same and new problems using new underlying technology.
Well, I have a question at this point. We mentioned practically everybody except of Sios, and this is a new company for me. Probably this is the first time that they present at a Tech Field Day, right?
Yeah, this is the first time they presented at Tech Field Day, but they're not a new company. They've been around for decades.
Right, and I tried to touch on this a little bit. Sios is attempting to bring high availability to a variety of different markets, and they're looking at both on-premises data center and the cloud. They are looking at various different platforms in both of them. So I tried to touch on this a little bit without actually naming names, but yes, that's where they are.
But it gets back to what we're doing with our storage and our data. We're trying to make it highly available. And again, they're addressing one of those fundamental problems, but in some really innovative ways. Get you across clouds, across sites, in ways that historically were, let's face it, exceedingly difficult to do.
And the thing about Sios too is that it's a super practical solution. I think that's the one word that jumps to my mind when looking at it. This thing is supposed to just work, and it's really not storagey. It's we integrate with Microsoft Cluster Server. We operate in Linux, and it just sort of does its thing in a way that is independent of the storage below it. And I think that that's really as well. It goes to our fundamental premise here that storage just isn't storage anymore. So let's sum up here. What's your thought on this premise? Is storage anymore, Erik?
Storage is transforming. what we're seeing now is the next generation of tools that let us manage our storage instead of just managing disks.
Well, I will add that maybe we are thinking more about data. So finally, we have a meaning for data storage. So it's not just storage, it's more around data and what we can do with it and not just storing it.
And I agree. It goes back to the old slogan that we used to say: "Storing is boring." Nobody really cares about where the stuff is stored. They care how it's presented to them.
Well, there you have it. Storage has always been a means to an end instead of an end of itself. And I think those of us in the industry have long seen this and known this. But frankly, it was so complicated and it was such a unique field that you needed people to focus on it. You needed companies to be innovating and coming up with specialist solutions for storage. And in a way, integrating up in the stack was almost an afterthought. But now, things have changed. Storage just isn't storage anymore. Storage is a component of a larger stack. And I think that that's, for me, the answer to this week's on-premise IT Roundtable. So as we wrap up, let's once again hear from each of our guests. Tell us once again where we can connect with you, where we can continue the conversation, and if you've published or done anything interesting recently that you want to call out to. Erik?
Erik Ableson, Ableson on Twitter, infrageeks.com. I wrote some interesting stuff on the Intel DPUs on Gestalt IT recently that might be worth looking at. Ping me if you're interested in talking about storage.
Enrico?
Again, I'm Enrico Signoretti, and my Twitter account is Signoretti, but you can also find me by searching on Google, because I am the only Enrico Signoretti in the IT industry. And if you want to read something about storage, you can find my write-ups on gigam.com.
And I'm Andy Banta, again, very easy, Andy Banta, at Andy Banta on Twitter. You can find me by searching Google as well. I've done a variety of different content over various different years. I'm not currently publishing a blog, but I am certainly welcome. I certainly welcome anybody who's interested in having a discussion about storage or anything else that's interesting.
And as for me, I'm Stephen Foskett. You can find me on Gestalt IT, also at the Tech Field Day events. And specifically, you can find all four of us this week at Storage Field Day, March 9th through 11th. We'll be live broadcasting on LinkedIn and on our website from basically 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific time. And if you miss any of the presentations, you can catch a recording of the live stream on LinkedIn, or you can just head over to YouTube/Tech Field Day to see recordings of all of the sessions next week. So thank you for listening to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do subscribe. You can subscribe on YouTube or in any of your favorite podcast applications. While you're there, maybe give us a like, maybe give us a comment. That really does help, and we really appreciate hearing from you. This podcast is brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.